During a routine patrol through a remote mountain reserve, Ranger Ethan came upon a bobcat kitten trapped in a deep, human-made ice pit while the mother was caught in a steel snare nearby. Poachers are close, the temperature is dropping, and a storm is closing in. Ethan has minutes, maybe less. He gambles, but he has no idea that soon he will be tied to a tree in solitude, bait for the hungry wolf pack prowling the mountains, and become the one who needs saving. Stay with us. What happened next set off a chain of events no one could have predicted and will make you rethink everything you thought you knew about the price of compassion. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The wind in the high country of the Black Rock Wilderness Preserve had a voice. It wasn't a whisper. It was a low, mournful moan that snaked through the lodgepole pines and scoured the snow from the granite peaks. Ranger Ethan Cole, a man whose face was a roadmap of 58 Montana winters, pulled the collar of his parka tighter. His knees ached. They always ached when a storm was brewing, and the sky to the west was the color of a fresh bruise. He wasn't on a routine patrol. Routine was a word for rookies in the summer. This was late winter, a hungry time, and he was tracking scum. For 2 weeks, he'd been finding their signs: a game trail littered with cigarette butts, a patch of rabbit fur near a snare wire so thin it was almost invisible. These weren't locals hunting for the pot. These were poachers, sloppy and greedy, taking animals for their pelts and leaving the rest to rot. They were an infection in the 200,000 acres of wilderness that Ethan considered his church, his office, and his home. He adjusted the snowshoes on his boots, the webbing creaking in the frozen silence. He'd left his snowmobile at the fire road, miles back. This part of the hunt had to be quiet. He topped a small ridge, the air sharp and thin in his lungs, and paused. And he heard it. It was a sound that didn't belong. Not the sharp yip of a coyote or the huff of a deer. It was a low, guttural snarl, followed by a frantic scratching and a high-pitched, desperate mewling. It was the sound of agony. Ethan unslung the old .30-30 rifle from his shoulder, his movements slow and methodical. He wasn't a gun guy, but up here, you were just another link in the food chain, and it paid to be a well-armed one. He moved toward the sound, stepping carefully between snow-laden spruce trees. He smelled them before he saw them. The sharp, coppery scent of fresh blood and the acrid tang of animal musk, thick with fear. He pushed aside a heavy bough and his heart seized. There, not 20 yards away, was a female bobcat. She was magnificent, or she would have been. Now, her beautiful, tawny-spotted fur was matted with ice and frozen blood. Her right front paw was clamped in the unforgiving jaws of a steel leg-hold trap. The chain, bolted to a deeply set stake, was pulled taut. She had ripped the ground around her to shreds, digging trenches in the snow and frozen earth in her desperate, pain-crazed attempts to pull free. Her leg was a ruin. She saw him, and a sound ripped from her chest, a deep, vibrating hiss that promised death. But it was a bluff. Her yellow eyes, narrowed to slits, were glazed with exhaustion and despair. She was done fighting. Then, Ethan saw what she was looking at, what all her fury and pain were focused on. 10 feet in front of her, just out of her reach, was a hole in the snow. It was a perfect dark circle, about 3 feet across. Ethan recognized it with a cold knot in his stomach. It was an old mining test bore, sunk decades ago by prospectors looking for silver and then abandoned. It was a death trap, plain and simple, usually covered by deep drifts. From within that icy shaft came the thin, reedy cry he'd heard. He moved slowly, circling wide of the trapped mother. He unclipped the service pistol from his hip, just in case, but kept it holstered. He approached the hole and peered down. His heart, which had seized, now simply broke. 12 feet down, at the bottom of the ice-slicked shaft, was a bobcat kitten. It was barely 8 weeks old, a tiny fluffball version of its mother. It was paddling weakly in a foot of near-frozen meltwater, its tiny claws scratching uselessly at the slick, vertical ice. It would look up, see the circle of gray sky, and let out another heart-wrenching wail. Ethan looked back at the mother. She was watching him, silent now. Her gaze was no longer hateful. It was a plea. She knew she was caught. She knew her baby was dying. And here was the two-legged monster that all her instincts told her to fear. "I see, Mama," Ethan whispered, the words stolen by the wind. "I see." This was a nightmare. The poachers were out here. The storm was coming. And he was in a race against a clock he couldn't see. He had to make a choice. The mother was trapped, but the kitten was dying of hypothermia now. "Okay, little fella," he said, his voice calm and steady, the one he used for spooked horses and lost hikers. "We're gonna get you out of there." He shrugged off his heavy pack. Every ranger carried climbing gear. He pulled out a 50-foot coil of nylon rope and a carabiner. He couldn't climb down. The shaft was too narrow and the ice too fragile. He'd get stuck himself. He had to lasso it. He tied a quick-release loop, the kind he'd used to rescue a dog from a river, and weighted it with his heavy multi-tool. He lay flat on his stomach, the frozen snow biting at his chest, and lowered the loop. "Come on, baby." "Just a little further," he coaxed. The kitten, terrified, shied away. The mother bobcat let out a low growl of anxiety. "I'm trying," Ethan muttered, as much to the mother as to himself. "He's scared." He jiggled the rope. The kitten, in a fresh panic, lunged away from it, its paws slipping. It went under the water. "No!" Ethan yelled. It surfaced, sputtering, its cries weaker. It was now or never. It was too weak to move. He lowered the loop again, guiding it, his fingers already numb. He nudged the kitten with the weighted tool, and with a deft flick of his wrist, the loop settled over its head and under one of its front legs. He pulled it taut. Gently, hand over hand, he lifted the tiny, sodden creature. It was impossibly light. It dangled, shivering so violently Ethan could feel the vibrations through the rope. He brought it up and immediately tucked it against his chest, ripping his own jacket open. The kitten was ice cold, its breathing shallow. He unzipped his parka, then his fleece vest, and tucked the animal directly against his thermal undershirt, zipping everything back up. The kitten gave a weak shudder and was still. "Hang on, buddy." "Just hang on," Ethan prayed. He looked at the mother. She had watched the entire thing, silent and intense. Now he had to deal with her, and he had to do it fast. He couldn't risk keeping the kitten on him. If the mother lunged, even in her weakened state, she would go for him, and the kitten would be caught in the middle. He looked around. A dense thicket of young spruce trees stood nearby, their low-hanging branches forming a natural, snow-roofed cave. He hurried over, pulled the kitten from his jacket, it was already breathing a little easier, and wrapped it in a spare wool blanket from his pack. He burrowed a deep nest under the branches, out of the wind, and placed the kitten inside. "You stay put. Mom's coming." Then he turned back to the mother. "Your turn," he said, pulling the heavy wire cutters from his pack side pocket. This was the hard part. He approached her slowly, cutters held low. "Easy now. I'm not the one who did this. I'm here to help." She hissed, pulling against the chain with a final desperate surge of adrenaline. The steel trap's jaws didn't budge, but the skin on her leg tore further. She collapsed, panting. Ethan was now 10 feet away. 5. He could see the raw bone. "God forgive those men," he whispered. He knelt, extending the cutters toward the heavy spring mechanism. He had to get his hands dangerously close to her mouth. And that's when he heard the voices. "Told you, Marcus. Told you I heard something." A young, reedy voice. "Shut up, Jed. You're jumpier than a frog in a hot skillet," a deeper voice grumbled. "It was probably just the catch. Should be right over." They were close. Too close. Ethan looked at the bobcat. Her ears were flat against her skull. She heard them too. She knew those voices. "It's now or never, Mama," Ethan grunted. He lunged forward, jamming the head of the wire cutters into the trap's spring. It was designed to be opened with a special tool, but Ethan put all his weight on the handles, prying, grunting with the effort. The poachers were crashing through the brush, maybe 50 yards away. "Come on, you piece of junk!" The spring groaned. The jaws opened just half an inch. It was enough. The mother bobcat ripped her mangled paw free. For a split second, she crouched, looking at him. Her yellow eyes were bottomless. There was no thanks, no anger, just a deep, wild understanding. "Go!" Ethan yelled. She didn't run, she bolted, but not away from the poachers. She launched herself in 3-legged, powerful bounds straight to the spruce thicket where he had hidden her kitten. She dove inside. A moment later, she emerged with the tiny, blanket-wrapped bundle held gently in her jaws. She gave Ethan one last fleeting look. Then she was gone, a tawny ghost vanishing into the heavier timber just as the storm began to break. "Hey! What the hell are you doing with our trap?" Ethan stood up slowly and turned. 2 men stood at the edge of the clearing. The younger one, Jed, was skinny with meth-rotted teeth. The older one, Marcus, was built like a bear, with a thick, greasy beard and cold, dead eyes. He was holding a skinning knife. Jed had a .22 rifle slung over his shoulder. "That was our bobcat, old man," Jed shrieked, his voice cracking. "This is a federal wilderness preserve," Ethan said, his voice a low rumble. He let his parka fall open, revealing the badge on his belt and the service firearm in its holster. "That was an illegal leg-hold trap. You're poaching on protected land." Marcus's eyes narrowed. He saw the empty trap, the cut cable he'd staked to the ground, the blood in the snow. He saw the ranger standing his ground. "You cost us money, Ranger," Marcus said, his voice soft and dangerous. He took a step forward. Jed, emboldened, unslung his rifle. Ethan didn't flinch. He didn't draw his firearm. Not yet. He just rested his hand on the butt. "You're in violation of at least 4 federal statutes, boys," Ethan said, his voice carrying the calm, unshakable authority of the mountain itself. "Poaching, illegal trapping, and endangering wildlife. Now you're going to hand over that rifle and we're all going to take a long walk back to my truck." Jed laughed, a sick, giggling sound. "Or what, Grandpa? You gonna shoot us?" He started to raise the .22. In a motion so smooth it was almost invisible, Ethan's firearm was out of its holster. He didn't aim at them. He aimed at a dead branch on a pine tree just above Jed's head. The crack of the .45 was deafening. It echoed off the peaks like a thunderclap. The branch above Jed exploded in a puff of snow and splinters. Jed screamed and dropped his rifle, stumbling backward. Marcus froze. He hadn't expected that. He'd expected a lecture. He'd expected fear. He hadn't expected a man who was faster, calmer, and more willing to meet violence than he was. "I am a federal ranger," Ethan said, his voice now like granite. The firearm was held low, but it was steady as a rock. "My next shot won't be a warning. You have two choices. You can drop the knife and surrender, or you can try your luck. But I'll tell you right now, this mountain doesn't care which one you pick." Marcus stared at Ethan. He saw no fear. He saw no anger. He just saw a job being done. He looked at Jed, who was whimpering. He looked at the .45, which looked enormous in the gray light. He knew a murder charge was a hell of a lot worse than poaching. Slowly, deliberately, Marcus dropped his skinning knife into the snow. He raised his hands. "Get the rifle, Jed," Ethan commanded. "Bring it to me." But first. The poachers, cowed and furious, were disarmed. Ethan marched them for 3 hours through the deepening snow back to his truck, the wind howling at their backs. He didn't say another word. He just let the cold and the silence do his work for him. The revenge was not long in coming. Marcus and Jed made bail. The local judge was notoriously soft, and the federal case would take months. A week later, Ethan was on patrol again, this time checking a different quadrant, monitoring a herd of elk. The storm had passed, but it had left a new world of deep, powdery snow. The temperature had plummeted. He was in a narrow ravine, a place where the radio signal was always spotty, when he realized his mistake. He'd been so focused on the elk tracks, he hadn't checked his back trail in an hour. He heard the zing of a wire, and a heavy, weighted net thrown from the ridge above fell over him. He was tangled before he could even raise his arms. He fell forward, his face hitting the snow, his rifle flying from his grasp. Before he could struggle, they were on him. Marcus and Jed. They didn't hit him hard, just enough to daze him. They dragged him out of the net, bound his wrists behind his back with heavy-duty zip ties, and tied his ankles. "Told you we'd find you again, old man," Marcus grunted, yanking the zip tie so tight it cut off Ethan's circulation. "You like these animals so much? You can join them." They took his pack, they took his rifle, they took his service firearm, and they took his main radio. What are you doing?" Ethan gasped, the cold snow soaking his chest. "Just taking a little walk, Ranger," Jed cackled, holding Ethan's own rifle. "You embarrassed us. Made us look like fools. We're just returning the favor." They hauled him to his feet and marched him. They pushed him for miles, off-trail, deep into the most remote part of the Black Rock. His bound ankles forced him to take small, shuffling steps. He fell constantly. They just hauled him up and kept going. The sun began to set. The temperature, which had been a bracing 10 degrees, began its nightly plunge toward zero. They stopped in a small clearing, dominated by a single skeletal lodgepole pine. The blizzard had scoured it clean. They cut the ties on his ankles and, using a new rope, tied him to the tree. They tied him tight, his back to the trunk, his hands still bound behind him. "This'll do," Marcus said. He unslung his own pack, a foul-smelling canvas bag. Ethan watched in dawning horror as Marcus pulled out chunks of deer offal and a plastic bottle full of blood. "No," Ethan whispered. "Oh yes," Marcus said. He began to walk in a wide circle around the clearing, dribbling the blood, leaving chunks of meat. He laid a scent trail leading directly to the clearing, and then another one, and another. You're baiting." "The wolves are hungry, Ranger," Jed said, his eyes wide and excited. "They've been close all week. That storm made them desperate." "You're murdering me," Ethan said, his voice flat. "Nah," Marcus said, finishing his work. "We're not doing anything." "The mountain is. You're just part of the food chain. You said so yourself." He walked up to Ethan, his face inches away. His breath was hot and rotten. "You should have just let us have the cat, old man." They laughed. And then they were gone, their snowshoes crunching in the twilight, leaving Ethan tied to a tree, a human sacrifice in a circle of blood. The silence that fell was worse than the poachers' voices. It was a heavy, cold, absolute silence. The first stars began to glitter in the purple sky. Ethan's fingers were already numb. His toes were next. He pulled against the ropes, but they were new, and the knots were trapper's knots. Solid. He closed his eyes. He thought about his life. It had been a good one. He'd served his country. He'd protected this land. It was a hell of a way to go, but he'd be damned if he'd scream. Then he heard it. The howl. It started low, then rose to a high, beautiful, terrifying crescendo. It was answered by another, and another. They weren't far. The scent trail was working. Ethan's heart hammered. This was it. He was a brave man, but this was a primal fear. He pulled at the ropes, twisting his wrists, feeling the skin tear. The rope didn't give. He saw them before he heard them. Gray shadows flitting between the trees at the edge of the clearing. The wolf pack. They were beautiful and terrible. 8 of them. They slunk into the clearing, their green-gold eyes glowing in the dusk. They saw the bait. And then they saw the main course. The alpha, a huge black male, stepped forward. He was cautious. This was new, but the man was tied. Helpless, an easy meal. The pack fanned out, circling. Ethan held his breath. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction of his fear. He stared back at the alpha. The alpha lunged, and the world exploded. A scream, a sound of such compressed fury that it tore the fabric of the night, erupted from the branches above. A tawny, spotted demon launched itself from the pine tree, directly onto the back of the alpha wolf. It was the mother bobcat. She was a blur of claws and teeth. The wolves, stunned by this aerial assault, scattered. The alpha yelped and twisted, trying to throw her, but she was clinging on, her back claws digging into his haunches, her front claws raking his neck. She wasn't trying to kill him. She was creating chaos. She was a cornered, furious hellcat, and she was, impossibly, defending him. The wolves regrouped, shocked out of their easy kill. They turned on this new, smaller, angrier threat. The bobcat shrieked again and leaped off the alpha, landing on a low-hanging rock. She was bleeding from a dozen nips, her bad leg held off the ground. But she was magnificent. She hissed, daring them to come closer. This was his chance. The distraction was all Ethan needed. His numb fingers had been working on the knots, not the poacher's new knots, but the zip tie on his wrists. Marcus had been lazy. He'd used the same tie. Ethan had been twisting it, straining it against the rough bark of the tree. As the wolves circled the bobcat, Ethan gave one final desperate pull. The plastic, brittle from the cold, snapped. His hands were free. He didn't hesitate. He fumbled at the knots on his chest. His fingers were wooden, useless, but he had a small blade in his boot. The poachers had missed it. He bent, his back screaming in protest, and got the knife. He sawed at the ropes. The bobcat was losing. The pack was closing in. She was 1, and they were 8. The rope fell away. Ethan was free. He was weak, frozen, and unarmed. But he wasn't helpless. The poachers had taken his main radio, but they hadn't known about the personal locator beacon on his belt, tucked under his parka. He grabbed it and mashed the red emergency button. A tiny green light blinked. Signal sent. Now he had to survive until help arrived. He grabbed a thick, dead branch from the ground. "Hey!" he roared, his voice cracking. Get out of here!" He charged into the fray, a wild, half-frozen man waving a stick, screaming at the top of his lungs. The wolves, already spooked by the bobcat, and now faced with a screaming, upright man who had untied himself, faltered. This was a meal that was fighting back way too hard. And then, a new sound. The distant, angry brap, brap, brap of snowmobile engines. And a brilliant white searchlight cut through the trees. The wolves had enough. They were hunters, not warriors. The alpha gave a low woof, and the pack melted back into the darkness. Ethan collapsed to his knees, his branch falling from his numb hand. 2 snowmobiles burst into the clearing, their lights pinning him. His partner, Mark, and a sheriff's deputy were off the machines before they even stopped. "Ethan!" My God! Mark ran to him, wrapping him in an emergency blanket. "We got your beacon." What happened? Who did this? Ethan, shivering, pointed not at where the poachers had gone, but at the rock. The mother bobcat was still there. She was bleeding, panting, but alive. She was staring at him. "Her," Ethan whispered, his teeth chattering. She saved me." Mark and the deputy stared. The bobcat looked at the armed men, looked at Ethan, and then, as silently as she had arrived, she leaped from the rock and disappeared into the night. "What in the hell is going on, Ethan?" the deputy asked, helping him up. "Justice," Ethan said. He then pointed to the bloody scent trail. "Marcus and Jed. They did this. That trail will lead you right to their camp. They won't be expecting you." The deputy nodded grimly, clicking his radio. "Dispatch, I have a 1087, harm to a federal officer. Suspects are armed. I'm in pursuit." He and Mark got on the snowmobiles, but Mark paused. "You okay to wait here?" "The med team is 10 minutes behind us." Ethan nodded, wrapped in the blanket, his back against the tree that was meant to be his grave. "I'm fine, Mark." "Go get 'em." They roared off into the night. Ethan sat in the sudden silence, the searchlights of the abandoned snowmobiles illuminating the clearing. He was alone. Not alone. He looked up at the ridge overlooking the clearing. In the halo of the light, he saw 2 pairs of eyes, one large and yellow, one small and bright. The mother bobcat was there. And beside her, standing steady on 4 paws, was her kitten. It was no longer wrapped in a blanket. It was a wild thing, healed and strong, standing by its mother's side. The mother bobcat stared down at him. There was no human emotion in her gaze. It wasn't love. It wasn't gratitude. It was something older and deeper. It was a recognition, a balance. The mountain had its own ledger, and the debts had been paid. Ethan, half frozen and in agony, slowly raised his numb hand. He gave her a small nod. The mother bobcat held his gaze for a long moment. Then she turned, nudged her kitten, and the two of them vanished into the cold, dark, unforgiving wilderness. When the medical team arrived, they found Ranger Ethan Cole sitting against the pine tree, a strange, peaceful smile on his face, staring up at the empty ridge. The bond was real. He had saved her family, and she, in turn, had saved his.